I've had this board set up for a little bit. It's just, you know, when you have Spotify, I have Spotify Premium for the no commercials, and you decide I'm just going to listen to one song from Perfect Circle. That's not a thing. It's not. Because then you start going, oh, that one. Oh, right, yeah. Oh, hey, yeah. So, madness. Not a result of listening to Perfect Circle, but not a result of listening to Perfect Circle. I wanted to look at tanking. So this time of year, we always talk about tanking, and this team's going to get a top draft pick, and they're building for the future. And of course, the ultimate win is the Stanley Cup. So what about it? And I looked at teams from 2004 on, so the last 15 years. 2004, your top 3 draft picks are Alex Ovechkin, Stanley Cup. Malkin, Stanley Cup for Pittsburgh. Cam Barker for Chicago. They did win a Stanley Cup. I don't think Cam Barker was a reason why, but they did win a Stanley Cup. Notables from that draft from teams that would win Stanley Cups. So what I did was I looked at the draft and I said, okay, these are either transformative kind of players, guys who made a huge difference for their organization, or Stanley Cup. David Krejci, of course, was drafted 63rd that year, won a Stanley Cup. Troy Brouwer, drafted 214th overall for Chicago. One of those grit depth guys you need. And what really stands out for me with the teams that have drafted Stanley Cup winners, and Chicago, Pittsburgh, and LA especially, is while people say, well, they tanked, they also drafted smartly outside of that top draft pick. And I know people talk a lot about Edmonton and how they get, you know, your McDavid, your Draisaitl, they don't get those depth guys. There is something to be said for that. You have to be good at the draft table, not just right away, but throughout the draft, day 1 and day 2. 2005, Crosby is the #1 draft pick for Pittsburgh. Bobby Ryan goes to Anaheim, Jack Johnson to Carolina. This, of course, was the full-on lottery, where all 30 draft picks were decided by lottery, and it was weighted towards teams that had finished at the bottom of the league over the previous, I think it was 3 seasons, being most likely to get that #1 draft pick. So Sidney Crosby was the #1 draft pick. And all of the conspiracy theories really hit the fan when Crosby and Malkin had both been added while the NHL hadn't played a game due to the player strike. So, well, the lockout / player strike, both sides. Kopitar was drafted 11th overall by LA. And there was a lot of talk at the time about how LA had drafted the best guy in the draft not named Crosby. And that LA gets this guy, and because he's from Slovenia, there were certain teams that, well, I don't know. Turned out LA was right. They'd win a couple of cups with Kopitar. 2006, your top draft picks are Eric Johnson to St. Louis, Jordan Staal to Pittsburgh, and Jonathan Toews to Chicago. So again, we got Pittsburgh and Chicago in there. They will go on and win a bunch of Stanley Cups, and that's why we have this discussion all the time. Meanwhile, #4 overall is Nick Backstrom, who went to Washington. He turned out to be pretty good. Brad Marchand, 71st overall. Milan Lucic, 50th overall in that draft as well. So Boston picks up 2 guys who will be key when they win the Stanley Cup in 2011 without having to tank to do it. 2007, Kane is your #1 draft pick. James Van Riemsdyk, #2. Kyle Turris, #3. All the way down at 129 is Jamie Benn going to Dallas. One of the biggest steals in history, one of the biggest finds in history. And it's an interesting draft because we talk about how, well, you know, you got to tank and do what you got to do. Van Riemsdyk goes to a Flyers team that had a really bad season and then bounced back. Turris goes to an Arizona team that would have a pretty good run in the 2010s, but I don't think it was a result of a tank. 2008, your top 3 draft picks. Stamkos, no cups for him yet. Doughty, 2 Stanley Cups. Bogosian was drafted by the Atlanta Thrashers. I don't have a small Thrashers magnet, so I put up the Jets. I hope Jets fans are okay with that. There's been some times on this channel where I'll equate the Thrashers and the Jets because it's the same organization and people don't like it. Carlson was drafted 15th overall by Ottawa that year, and Carlson, with a C, John Carlson was drafted at 27th overall by the Capitals. So this is what I'm talking about, how you can get your guy. You can get Ovechkin, Crosby, Malkin. You can get them in the top 2, but you need to be smart when you're drafting later. if you're really going to build up to a Stanley Cup winning roster, those later draft picks are really important. The 2009 entry draft, Tavares is first overall to the Islanders, and he's right away the face of the franchise, and this is the guy who's going to lead him to the promised land, and I always thought it was too much for him. Hedman goes to Tampa, and again, the Tampa Bay Lightning, should they win the Stanley Cup this year, and they have, the President's Trophy and a great year going, people will look and go, well, look, they got Stamkos and Hedman in back-to-back drafts. My answer to that would be, yeah, one 11 years ago and one 10 years ago. They've done a lot since then to really surround those guys with really quality players. Duchesne went third overall that year to Colorado. 2010, Taylor Hall, Tyler Seguin, Eric Goodbranson. This is the draft where almost everybody gets traded. And the interesting thing, of course, is that Hall and Seguin get traded, and you would argue that neither got enough back. And I believe Peter Chiarelli may have been involved in one or both of these deals. I don't think it gets mentioned very often, and I don't think he'll put it on his resume when he's looking for work. Kuznetsov was drafted 26th overall that year by the Capitals. So again, they are drafting very well and late. So the idea that, well, this team is drafting first overall, great. Now they're going to win the Stanley Cup. Hold your horses. Not necessarily, because the team might just be loading up with a later draft pick, either in the first round or outside the first round altogether. 2011, Nugent Hopkins goes first overall, Landeskog second, Huberdeau third. Now, Huberdeau's really turned into an amazing player. Landeskog's developed into a 30-goal scorer in his own right. Nugent Hopkins, I think, has still underachieved for what he was supposed to be. And there are fans who get upset when you talk about Nugent Hopkins. Like, he's a really good player. He is, but is he a number one overall draft pick? No. And I think when he was drafted right after Hall, the idea was, okay, now the Oilers have something going. They should pull their way out of this mire, this muck they've been in, and they didn't. Drafted 104th overall that year was Johnny Gaudreau, who's been pretty good for Calgary. Palat was drafted 208th overall for Tampa. And again, I'm just looking at these guys Tampa has been adding overall. I don't even put Vasilevsky on the board, and he's a first-round draft pick for them too. Andrew Shaw, 139th overall by Chicago. His grit, his timely goals, and just his personality will help them a lot. Kucherov at 58th overall. He's absolutely a number one overall draft pick in 2011 if we redid that draft now. Kucherov, absolutely. Just imagine Kucherov playing with McDavid. Just let that percolate in the brain a little bit. And that's kind of why I'm saying this is a draft where Tampa's not drafting in the top three, and they get Kucherov and Palat. 2012, Yakupov's your number one draft pick. The Oilers made a move that at the time a lot of us said don't do that they should have drafted a defenseman. Ryan Murray went second overall. Galchenyuk went third overall. Number 16 in that draft is Tom Wilson. So again, the Capitals in that first round draft pick, drafting outside the top 10, they pick up a guy who will be key to their Stanley Cup. Whether you love him or hate him, he was key last year to them winning it. 2013, Nathan McKinnon's drafted first overall by Colorado. Barkov. And we'll start seeing Florida, this year and the next season, of course, Huberdeau and Goodbranson. They're on the board a lot is kind of what I'm getting at. Drouin, drafted third overall, and of course, he is now out of Tampa. They got Sergachev for him. Jake Gensel, 77th overall by Pittsburgh. Just really smart drafting by the Penguins. And overall, just the Penguins have done this so well. And you have to respect them for that. 2014, Aaron Ekblad goes first overall to the Florida Panthers. Reinhart, number 2 to Buffalo, and Draisaitl, number 3 to the Oilers. This is a time where the Oilers don't draft first, and yet they draft probably the best guy in the draft. That said, Pasternak goes 25th overall to Boston. 79th overall, the Tampa Bay Lightning add Braden Point. So again, Tampa keeps adding these guys when they're not in the top, and when they're in the top spots, they draft the right person. So, yeah, just an amazing run that Tampa's had, in part because of the drafting that got done. 2015, Connor McDavid goes first overall, Jack Eichel second, Dylan Strome third, Number 4 needs to be on the board because Mitch Marner. At the time, it was seen that Toronto might be reaching a little bit. They might have been able to get him at 5 or 6. And it's been a really smart move. Noah Hannafin, who was a very highly thought of draft pick at the time, really hasn't panned out as was expected. Marner, on the other hand, he's going to get paid this summer. 2016, Matthews, of course, goes first. Laine second. Dubois third. Matthew Tkachuk at 6th. He is a key guy for the Calgary Flames. I don't even have Monahan on the board, but he wasn't a top 3 draft pick either. DeBrincat at 39 for Chicago, I think is the steal of that draft, and I thought so at the time. And thankfully, the 2016 draft reaction is still there, but people are so busy plugging away at the Pettersson video, and oh, look at his reaction to Pettersson. They don't look from the year before at my reaction to DeBrincat and saying, man, Chicago's just loading up. This isn't fair. That I couldn't believe he'd fallen to 39 in the draft. And if it was because of his size, well, it's a lesson that scouts know now. 2017, here's where we start getting into speculation. So 2016, you got Matthews, and the Leafs have gotten better. You got Laine. Winnipeg's been pretty darn solid the last couple of years. Dubois to Columbus. Columbus has been in the playoffs 2 years in a row. They're trying to make it 3. Of course, Tkachuk with the Flames. They're number 1 in the West. DeBrincat, now Chicago's not going to make the playoffs this year in all likelihood. They still have a chance. But DeBrincat, good young kid, great goal scoring, still got a lot of upside there. When you get into 2017 and 2018, it's just, there's still a lot of speculation. But if we're looking at the direction of the teams, so Hischier goes to the New Jersey Devils. And Hischier compared to other number 1 draft picks, I'm still on the fence as to how high of an upside he has. I think he's a solid player. Is he going to be considered among, one of the great number 1 draft picks? No, I don't think so. But it's still really early. Nolan Patrick at 2. Patrick could go either way with this. He could either develop into being a pretty darn solid top 2 center, or maybe not. Heiskanen in Dallas looks pretty good. And I say pretty good right now. He's been excellent at points this year. He did go to the All-Star game. I don't mean to undersell him at all. I love Heiskanen's game a lot. That being said, he's a teenager. He's a kid. Of course, Pettersson at 5 for Vancouver. If you redid this draft right now, there are a lot of people that say, oh, Pettersson would go number 1. Never underestimate, though, just how important it is to have a guy like Heiskanen on your blue line. So, yes, Pettersson would likely go number 1, depending on the team's needs drafting at number 1. He's been a find for the Canucks. I don't have Besser on the board either, because I'm trying to focus not on just drafts and steals, but on building a cup champion. That's your ultimate goal, right? Dahlin, number 1 for Buffalo this past June. Svechnikov, number 2 by Carolina, and Kotkaniemi, number 3 by the Habs. It's interesting that Svechnikov and Kotkaniemi have played some role. Kotkaniemi more during the middle of the part of the season. Svechnikov is getting there now. Part of a role in getting their teams potentially to the playoffs. Whereas Dahlin has been amazing on that blue line for Buffalo. Yes, Buffalo's had a really rough time. I put none of it on Rasmus Dahlin. He's been fantastic. So, really honestly, the question mark with Buffalo is this. Eichel comes in the draft 4 years ago. 4 years later, they're drafting Dahlin. Right now, is the team further ahead? Like with the Oilers, you've got the Oilers logo on this board entirely too much. Could they win another draft lottery this year? Yeah. Are they favored to? No. But how much further ahead are the Oilers right now than they were years back? They've got McDavid, but have they surrounded him with enough talent to win? So let's look at Cup champions. 2006. So again, I'm starting with after the lockout. Rod Brindamore's the captain for Carolina. Cam Ward's their starter. Ward was drafted 25th overall in 2002. So, homegrown goaltender and first-round draft pick as well. Ward, however, would never really get to that level again. So he gets the Conn Smythe. He's this tremendous rookie. He's seen as kind of the savior of the Carolina franchise. A lot of the same things I'm hearing now about Carolina, like, okay, this team has proven they're going to stay. Fans are back. Team's going to stay. I remember hearing that in 2006 as well. So yeah, Carolina didn't really tank to get there. Eric Stahl was a high draft pick in 2003, but all the '03 draft picks turned out to be pretty solid, except for two, I think. 2007, Scott Niedermayer's your captain. J.S. Shiger's the goaltender of record. He was drafted number 13th overall by Hartford in '95. He passed through Calgary on his way to Anaheim. Anaheim was a team built on veterans. There was some youth in there, but really, genuinely, this was a team built for a Stanley Cup. A lot of veteran leadership there. 2008, Nick Lidstrom is your first European captain to win a Stanley Cup. Chris Osgood was a draft pick of Detroit's 54th overall in 1991. At the point of winning this Stanley Cup, he has left Detroit, gone through the Islanders, St. Louis, and come back to Detroit. So, Osgood, he's in my Hall of Fame. He should be in the NHL Hall of Fame. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I understand why. I just don't agree with the reasoning. 2009, Sidney Crosby is the captain for Pittsburgh. A generational talent if there ever was one. Marc-Andre Fleury's their goaltender who was drafted number 1 the year before the draft you see before you. And Fleury, Malkin, Crosby, followed by Stahl, is part of the reason why people will say, well, you need to tank. You need to tank. Look what Pittsburgh and Chicago did. Yeah, Pittsburgh was down at or near the bottom of the league for a long time. And there aren't very many teams that can do that. And then the other part of it is you have to draft well outside of that first round. And you have to surround them with the right veterans. And that '09 team in Pittsburgh had a little bit of everything. 2010, Jonathan Toews is the captain for Chicago. So again, we've got a draft pick that's on this board as captain. Antti Niemi, an undrafted goaltender, is their starter towards the Stanley Cup. 2011, Zdeno Chara is the captain for the Boston Bruins. Definitely not on this board. Tim Thomas was drafted by Quebec in 1994. So, the Bruins didn't tank to get there in 2011. That Tyler Seguin draft pick, that was, of course, Toronto's that got moved over to Boston. And when you think about it, well, what could Toronto have done with Tyler Seguin? And if Toronto had their draft picks, they'd had Dougie Hamilton and Tyler Seguin, you don't get Austin Matthews. Maybe you still have Brian Burke as general manager. And here's the mind-blowing part. Maybe Tavares isn't there. Maybe he stays with the Islanders. Mind's blown. Or he's in San Jose, right? Dustin Brown's your captain in 2012 for the Kings. Jonathan Quick, the number 72 pick in 2005. So not on the board, but he's here. Again, mid-round draft pick goaltenders tend to be pretty darn good. And, goaltenders are really tricky. This is why they don't get drafted in the first round very often. 2013, we're back to Jonathan Toews and the Hawks. Corey Crawford is the goaltender of record. He was drafted in 2003 by the Chicago Blackhawks. And again, not a first-round draft pick. Highly thought of when they drafted him. And they groomed him in the minors for a nice long while. And then when he came up, he was pretty darn good. 2014, Dustin Brown's the captain. Jonathan Quick's the goaltender for the LA Kings. 2015, back to the Hawks. Jonathan Toews, Corey Crawford. And again, while you can argue Chicago, you could kind of argue LA in that they get Doughty, but Kopitar was not a top 3 draft pick. At number 11, I'm going to say a team doesn't tank to finish with the number 11 draft pick. So the only tanking draft pick was Doughty. And that's if you can argue that the Kings did it on purpose. And my argument's always been that teams don't do it on purpose until they're already out of the playoffs. In October, everybody's a Stanley Cup champion. In January, there's a handful of teams saying, next year, we'll see what we can do at the draft. 2016, Sidney Crosby wins again as captain. Matt Murray, a number 83 draft pick in 2012. He is the guy. And it's led to, I think, some unrealistic expectation with Matt Murray now. But Murray's had a pretty good year this year. We'll see if the Penguins can win 3 out of 4 and become an official dynasty. 2017, Sid the Kid is again your captain. And Murray and Fleury kind of split duties in that Stanley Cup playoff due to injury issues. And, of course, Matt Murray took over in 2016 due to injury issues with Fleury. And then Fleury came back. There was no way. They went right back to Matt Murray. So the the Penguins kind of stand out as a team that, yes, there's some tanking involved, I guess, to get here, but they've maintained that excellence for about a decade. 2018, after ages and ages of frustration that dates back to here and beyond, for those who remember the Mike Gartner, Mike Liut, Don Beaupre, like a lot of guys went through town that were pretty darn good. Dino Cicerelli, Adam Oates. The frustration ended this past June with Alex Ovechkin, your #1 draft pick, first on the board, being captain of the team when they won the Cup. Braden Holtby, who was drafted 93rd in 2008, is the starting goaltender. So yeah, whoever drafts first this year, does it mean Stanley Cup? No. No. In order to get a team to a Stanley Cup, you have to draft smartly outside of the first round. You have to sign free agents in the right at the right time, and you have to make sure they're the right guys who are going to mix well. What Chicago, LA, and Pittsburgh have had going for them when they've won is the management team has been very smart. Their scouts have been good, both professional and amateur scouts. And I don't know that just saying, well, Buffalo will just tank out, and if they draft first, they get Hughes, then they're going to be in the playoffs. You have to keep an eye on the other draft picks, the other pieces that you surround those guys with. You can have 3 or 4 fantastic talents on your team, but if the rest of the team is middling and mediocre, you're still going to finish outside the playoffs. A Connor McDavid, a Jack Eichel, a Leon Draisaitl, even to some extent Matthews. It can only drag you so far. You have to have everything else around them. And with Matthews in Toronto, they've been very smart about who they surround him with, bringing in Marleau, bringing in Tavares. I would argue that adding Muzzin was a really smart move for Toronto this year as well. I know there's some debate because they needed a right-hand defenseman, and that maybe Mike Babcock wasn't happy because he didn't get the defenseman he wanted. Jake Muzzin isn't really the guy he was looking for, but I think there's been some smart moves by the Leafs. We'll see if it pays off for them. And some of these steals later on just show. You don't win the Stanley Cup at the draft table. It's smart management. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just tap it upon this video. And hey, just because of this doesn't mean that the draft lottery is not going to be fun when that happens. And there'll be a live stream on the channel here when it does happen. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And I'll talk to you again soon.